Hello and welcome to the Housing Health and Safety Rating System Training, or HHSRS as it's known for short. Today we will cover what is HHSRS, who does the HHSRS affect, how is it enforced, what are the fines, and what are the 29 hazards. And we'll break these down into bite-sized bits of learning for you. At the end of this module, you should feel competent in carrying out your own assessments on your rental property and have a full understanding of what HHSRS is, how to avoid the fines by having a safe environment for your tenants to rent, and how to look for ongoing potential issues and correct them at the time of your midterm inspection. What is HHSRS? Housing Health and Safety Rating System is formed as Part 1 of the Housing Act 2004, and it states that any residential premises should provide a safe and healthy environment for potential occupants or visitors. It's a risk-based assessment carried out by the local authority, which focuses on identifying and tackling the hazards that are most likely to appear within a residential premise. It's a way for local councils in England and Wales to monitor the condition of rental properties and enforce notices on landlords should their property fall below the current standard set within the HHSRS. The local authority will assess the property, considering one or several of the 29 hazards listed under the HHSRS, which could be a danger to occupancy. They categorise the 29 hazards into 4 sections, which we will refer to later in the training. Once the local authority have been alerted to a health and safety risk within the property, they will arrange an assessment. Officers will carry out the inspection, and depending on the findings, it will be determined which notice a landlord will receive, if any. There are 4 levels of notice. Hazard awareness notice. The hazard awareness notice is the lowest form of notice you can receive. The notice makes the landlord and council aware of potential hazards in the property. No further action will be taken by the council from this moment, unless the tenants raise another issue with the council, or if the potential hazard becomes worse during the tenancy. Improvement notice. An improvement notice tells the landlord to carry out repairs or improvements that are needed to remove or reduce the risk to the tenant's health and safety. The notice gives a time limit within which the work needs to be done by the landlord, and if the work is not done and the landlord does not comply, then they can be prosecuted. The council can take emergency remedial action if they feel it likely that the tenant will suffer serious harm in the near future if conditions in the property do not improve. The council can do the work themselves and charge the costs back to the landlord. Prohibition order. A prohibition order puts restrictions on access to parts of the house. It can also place a limit on the number of people living there. The council can suspend the prohibition order so the current tenants do not have to move out, but no new tenants can move in until the property is seen as fit to live in. Demolition order. Finally, there is the demolition order. In extreme cases, the council can order that a building is demolished if they feel it is severely inhabitable and beyond repair. Fines. As a landlord, if you do not comply with a HHSRS, then you can incur some nasty fines. You can also find some examples of these on Google, but just so you can see what you could get yourself into, a landlord was recently fined £20,000 for putting his tenants' lives at risk across various properties that they own in London by not having the correct electrical and fire safety certificates, resulting in several problems. One of the largest fines ever recorded was for over £400,000. This was to a landlord who was allowing people to live in squalid conditions, overcrowding, lack of sanitary and cooking facilities, and poor hygiene. The average fine is between £1,500 and £17,000, and often the fines are issued because the landlord or letting agent aren't aware of what the HHSRS standards are or have been served an enforcement notice but do not comply. The landlord electrical safety and fire safety standards are being reviewed at present, and changes will be happening in 2019 to help protect tenants further. 29 hazards. We will run through all the 29 hazards in detail throughout this training, but to start, here is an example. A blind has been fitted to a window or door and the blind has a cord. For health and safety, the cord must be fixed to the wall, regardless of whether the cord is intact or broken. This law was put into place in 2014 and failure to comply currently carries anything up to a £3,000 penalty per blind cord. Should a child or an adult die as a result of a blind cord, a manslaughter charge could be given. Earlier I mentioned that the 29 hazards are split up into 4 categories. These categories are physiological requirement, psychological requirements, protection against infection and protection against accidents. Across these 4 categories there are 29 subcategories, and these are what creates the hazard checklist that the enforcement officers will use to assess their findings and determine the likelihood of an accident actually occurring. The level of likelihood of an accident occurring will determine whether the landlord is put into category 1 or 2. If a landlord is put into category 1, then they will need to rectify any issues immediately. If they are put into category 2, then they will have time to spend on rectifying the issues. Please take a few minutes to familiarise yourself with all 29 categories. We will run through these individually, and there will be additional hazards such as VOCs or volatile organic compounds that you may not be familiar with. So let's start with the physiological hazards. Damp and mould. As you can see from the photograph on the right hand side, the damp is present around the window, climbing up the stairs and onto the blind, and is on the lower levels around the skirting board. This damp is caused by a structural or design fault. The damp starts on a low level and then will start to climb up the wall. There are no signs of further damp in the property, meaning this would be the landlord's responsibility to rectify the issue and then maintain the property after treatment. The landlord must ensure that the issue that is causing the damp is fixed. Both house dust mites and mould flourish in damp and humid conditions, and their growth is influenced by an increase in temperature. Damp can be caused by a tenant's lifestyle. Things like not ventilating the property during bathing or showering and drying clothes on radiators without ventilation are all causes of damp. Landlords can also be held accountable for substandard property conditions and design, such as a lack of no ventilation bricks that allow air to pass through, or the windows are sealed and the tenant has no ability to open them, allowing airflow. Damp can also be caused by something as simple as leaks internally or externally, and these leaks can cause sustained damp and mould. Excess cold. Suboptimal indoor temperatures are hazards, as they can cause a threat to health or life. In the property to the right hand side of the screen, there are no working radiators and the floor has poor insulation. But you can't tell this from the picture. It was only when we were carrying out an assessment in the property that this became apparent to us. Sometimes suboptimal indoor temperatures can be caused by tenants. For example, if they cannot afford the heating bills, or they restrict living to one room to reduce the heating costs and turn off all other heat sources to every room apart from the room they're in. Other times it can be down to substandard property conditions. For instance, if the property does not have adequate heating, is poorly insulated, or has drafts from poorly fitted doors and windows. This would fall within a landlord responsibility to ensure the property stays within a set temperature which is not going to cause risk to health or life to their tenant. Excess heat. Did you know that room temperature is considered to be 18 to 20 degrees on a thermostat dial? Having your heating between these temperatures reduces the threat to health from excessively high indoor temperatures. Excessively high temperatures can be caused by tenant lifestyle. If a tenant doesn't open the windows during the peak of summer, it traps the heat in, but often we find it's due to substandard property conditions. Perhaps the tenant hasn't been provided access to windows that open, or there could be defects in the heating system. For example, a fault in the thermostat, meaning the heating remains on permanently, even during summer months. Or excessive heat can be caused by solar heat due to excessive glass, such as conservatories. Asbestos and MMF. Asbestos and MMF, which stands for Manufacture of Mineral Fibres. This hazard area covers the presence of or exposure to asbestos fibres or MMF within the property or its grounds. See in the photograph an old prefab garage with a corrugated roof. The corrugated roof in this picture is actually an asbestos corrugated roof and should be disposed of correctly to avoid risk of inhalation. In most traditional built houses, flats and garages, some products and materials may contain asbestos. There are three main types of asbestos: crucityl, which is a white asbestos, and the amphibole forms, crucidolite, which is a blue asbestos, and amosite, which is a brown asbestos. You are not required to know which types of asbestos may be in your property, but you are required to carry out a risk assessment to ensure that there is no asbestos present within the property or its grounds or its outbuildings. If you suspect asbestos may be present within the property, you must instruct a specialist to assess whether it's asbestos and to remove it safely prior to your tenants starting their tenancy. Biocides. You will see in the picture on the right hand side that there is a loft. Unfortunately, it contains wood rot, and so biocides were used to treat the timber. In this particular picture, there are no forms of ventilation, so the biocide that was used for 3 to 5 days to treat the wood rot has no ventilation out of the roof. The only ventilation is through the loft hatch and out of the property through open windows. It's important to ventilate the property while using biocides, as it can cause threats to health from the chemicals used to treat the timber and mould growth in properties. Biocides are intended to prevent growth or development of insects, fungi, moulds, bacteria, or kill those already present. The problem only arises where biocides aren't used correctly, or where the property is occupied before the fumes have been allowed to disperse adequately. Carbon monoxide and fuel combustion products. Most of you would have heard of carbon monoxide and that it is one of the biggest killers from a gas-based product in the UK. This section covers threats to health or life from inhalation of gases. The current UK law states that any property containing a solid fuel burner, such as a log fire, must have a carbon monoxide alarm fitted. This alarm must be located 3 metres or less from the burner. The CO alarm, as we call it, which means carbon monoxide alarm, will indicate to your tenant that there has been a fuel leak and subsequently their health is at risk. The main source of carbon monoxide within a property is an incomplete combustion of all fuels containing carbon. These include gas, oil, and solid fuels. The current law only covers solid fuel burners, although in 2019 that law will change to include gas, so we recommend that any gas appliance, including gas hob or solid fuel burner in your property, is fitted with carbon monoxide alarms immediately. Gas and oil burning appliances are the main source of nitrogen dioxide or sulfur dioxide, which both have a noticeable smell. Gas appliances are currently the largest killer from carbon monoxide poisoning in the UK. Should you not comply with the UK regulation and law, you run the risk of a large fine and/or manslaughter charges. Lead. This covers threats to health from the ingestion of lead. Lead once was used in old pipework and paint to cover the pipe. In the picture on the right hand side is a lead pipe. The one above it is a copper pipe. There are two main sources of lead within a home, and that is paint and water pipes. Lead is a heavy metal which, when ingested, gathers in the body and has toxic effects to the nervous system, cognitive development and blood production, so children under 3 are most at risk. A quick way to identify if a pipe might be lead is if it scratches easily, leaving a bright shiny scratch line. If you suspect the property you are in to have lead pipes, you must replace these with copper pipes throughout. Lead ingestion can be serious and carry heavy penalties if you do not abide by the current law. Radiation. It is rare that you'll come across radiation or exposure to radiation, but in this section we will talk about threats to health from radon gas. Low frequency fields are produced whenever an electrical current is flowing and can be found in the vicinity of power lines, electricity substations and electrical appliances. High levels of radon gas is the second most important cause of lung cancer after smoking. But most radon gas exposure occurs at home from electrical appliances. For existing properties, a remedial technique is to provide a radon sump. A sump is simply an underfloor space or cavity into which a pipe is inserted and used to extract radon. It is rare that the low levels of radiation caused by electrical appliances cause lung cancer, but if you have any doubts, you must ensure all the relevant checks are completed. Uncombusted fuel gas. In this section, we will cover the threats of asphyxiation resulting from the escape of fuel gases into the atmosphere within the property. Asphyxiation occurs when the fuel gas builds up within the property, displacing the air to such an extent that the occupants are unable to obtain enough oxygen to breathe. The most common gas used in properties is mains gas, formerly known as natural gas, although there is now an increase in the use of liquid petroleum gas, LPG for short, in particularly isolated areas or rural areas. Fuel gas should be checked every year by a qualified gas engineer, and if a tenant reports the smell of gas, it must be investigated immediately. We also advise that carbon monoxide alarms are installed whenever there is LPG or mains gas leading to appliances. Volatile organic compounds. VOCs are a diverse group of organic chemicals which include formaldehyde. When these everyday household chemicals are mixed together, it produces a vapour at room temperature. Some people may incur short-term irritation or allergic reactions to the eyes, nose, skin and respiratory tract. It is advised that if you have VOC products in a rental property, means of ensuring adequate and appropriate ventilation is required, or alternatively, as a landlord, you may remove all of these products, or the tenant may gather their own products to make their own appropriate ventilation as required.